The bulkhead crumpled like wet foil under Morvaal fists. Steel screamed, atmosphere roared, and then the boarding hatch folded inward and tore free, flung into the corridor of the Shulkarr hive-ship. The air was thick with motes from ruptured chitin and vaporized insulation. Emergency tendrils of glue flesh were already writhing from the walls, seeking to seal the breach. But they had only a heartbeat before the next shock. Morvaal warriors surged through the opening in a wave of armor and muscle. Each one stood well over 2 meters, wardweave harnesses humming in tight sync with their breathing. Their bioluminescent tattoos pulsed beneath translucent plating, feeding real-time signals into the link bands clamped around their wrists and necks. At their head moved Krann of the Morvaal, shoulders hunched and jaw clenched. His breath came in hot growls, carefully paced. The ship stank of Shulkarr pheromones, fear, hunger, distant mating calls. His blood woke at the sense, an old rage surging, the engineered urge to tear, rend, burn, until nothing moved. A new voice cut through that rush, firm and steady inside his skull. Krann. Hold formation, Sergeant Jurek Ryback said, the link band translating neural patterns to pulses against Krann's skin and ghost sound in his inner ear. 2 by 2. Stagger left. We need that junction, not trophies. Krann's lip curled. The Shulkarr ahead hissed and flowed into the corridor, a scuttling carpet of slick limbs and chattering mandibles. The old instincts wanted him to sprint alone into their center, to die surrounded by enemies so the genes would remember his name. Instead, he took one long breath, felt the faint thrum of the wardweave amplified around his spine, and lifted a clenched fist. The Morvaal behind him snapped into a disciplined wedge, boots slamming in perfect time. Not because they were conditioned to obey any voice, but because months of drills and punishments and hard-earned praise had carved new pathways into old minds. Krann stepped forward, his own voice a thunder in the cramped passage. "Front rank! 2 steps!" he roared, words in Terran standard, mouth unfamiliar with the vowels but determined. Shields, energy screens flared in front of the leading Morvaal, the wardweave projecting overlapping planes of pale blue. Shulkarr acid jets struck the barrier and sizzled, boiling into clouds of caustic steam. Behind the Morvaal, smaller figures dashed through the swirling mist. Corporal Lila Kharuun slid to her knees at the corner, rifle up, brown eyes sharp despite the stinging air. The link band on her forearm flashed status icons. Krann's heart rate, the Morvaal squad's collective adrenaline levels, their relative positions. She saw his numbers spike, flirting with the range that meant blood rage. Her thumb brushed the manual dampener but did not depress it. Krann had asked her, once, to trust him with it. "Left corridor clear?" she called. "Clear." Came a Lithraks rasp through the squad channel. Sisek's voice carried the faint, dry hiss of scales against glass. "Shulkarr, cluster ahead, around the brood pool. Junction in 20 meters, Jurek said from behind. "Krann, we need that intersection locked down, then push right to keep them off Kharuun's flank. Remember the civilians in Pod Bay 6. Krann remembered, the human children screaming as Shulkarr cutters tried to breach the evacuation pod. Lila standing between them and a raging Morvaal recruit only a week ago. He remembered her not reaching for the kill code, only for his shoulder. He bared his teeth, but this time the motion resembled a grin. "We move," he growled. And the Morvaal advanced as a single organism, not a stampede. The Shulkarr poured down the corridor, black eyes glittering. Krann's first blow pulped 2 carapaces at once, but his strikes were precise now, directed where Lila's HUD outlined weak joints. Sisek's shots threaded between Morvaal's shoulders, picking off synapse drones that tried to rally the swarm. The corridor became a whirlwind of violence, but it had pattern and purpose. No one broke from formation. No one chased a retreating foe. From the central command compartment of the UNSV Stalwart Dawn, Admiral Hugo Lemaire watched feeds from drone cameras and helmet rigs. The tactical overlays painted the slaughter in data. Enemy numbers dropping. Friendly heart rates spiking in controlled arcs. Morvaal blood chemistry stabilized by wardweave injections timed to the second. Legionnaire Cohort 1 is holding, reported Colonel Farid Kavala from the console beside him. Farid's eyes tracked Krann's position, one finger tapping a staccato rhythm against the edge of the display. Cross-branch integration checks out. No uncontrolled losses. Lemaire said nothing, but his shoulders eased a fraction. Outside the forward viewport, the Shulkarr hive-ship spun slowly in the dark, its organic hull pitted and burning where the stalwart Dawn's guns had raked it. On the hive-ship, at the heart of that flame-lit chaos, a Morvaal warrior raised his weapon and obeyed a human voice voluntarily. It had seemed impossible to many, not so long ago, far away in space and time from that boarding action. The decision that made it possible had begun in a much quieter room. It had been 8 p.m. ship time when Nyasha Okafor first stepped into the small debriefing chamber on Bulwark Ring. The place smelled of recycled air and coffee that someone had let grow cold. The pane of smart glass that made up most of one wall showed Earth drifting below, marbled with white and blue and amber city glow. Nyasha's gaze found a particular coastline by reflex. Somewhere down there, on a humid plain where the jungles hadn't been pushed back yet, her younger self had patched up a farmer mauled by something the locals only called the night beast. They had never found the creature. The farmer insisted it had apologized before it fled. Everyone had laughed at that, including Nyasha then. Tonight, she wasn't laughing. The man waiting for her at the table wore the utilitarian black of Terran Expeditionary Command. Colonel Farid Kavala had broad shoulders and a neatly trimmed beard peppered with a few white strands he didn't bother to dye. His expression mixed exhaustion and electric focus. He rose when she entered, more out of habit than ceremony. "Dr. Okafor," he said. "Colonel," she replied. "You said it was urgent." Farid tapped the table interface. The smart glass dimmed, then lit from within with a view of a clearing in dense forest, captured from a drone at high altitude. At first, Nyasha's mind insisted the tall shapes moving through the trees were human. The proportions were close enough. 2 arms, 2 legs, heads held high. Then she saw the thickened neck muscles, the segmented armor plates that seemed to grow directly from pale flesh, the faint glow of tattoos tracing unfamiliar patterns along their arms. She recognized the grove itself. She had camped not far from there once, during her postdoctoral fieldwork. "These are from Earth," she said slowly. "Taken by a survey drone 6 days ago," Farid confirmed. "We have more." He cycled through images. Nyasha watched Morvaal and Lithraks in grainy night vision, raiding isolated homesteads, yes, but also tending to crude shrines, teaching children how to fight, burying their dead with care and ritual. "These aren't rogue gene mod cells," she murmured. "They're a community." Farid exhaled. "More than that. Preliminary linguistics say they remember being made and then left. History matches too neatly with some of the sealed Pact archives I'm allowed to read." Nyasha looked up sharply. "Are you telling me Earth is, what, a dumping ground?" "A quarantine sphere," Farid said, "chosen by people who thought it was empty, too remote for their sensors at the time. Good magnetosphere to mask their mess. They didn't come down far enough to notice we were already climbing out of our trees." He watched her face as the implications unfolded behind her eyes. Billions of humans, the product of their own slow, messy evolution, sharing a world with creatures designed for war and then exiled there like hazardous waste. "How many?" she asked finally. "We don't know. Pockets, hidden in places we blamed on our own monsters." His mouth twisted. "Turns out some of our monsters were real all along, just not ours." Nyasha's instincts as a scientist, a healer, and someone who had built her career on understanding the mind of the other all collided at once. Shock, yes, and a faint, irrational sense of betrayal, as if the universe had been playing a long, slow trick. But beneath that, excitement flickered, not at the existence of Morvaal and Lithraks, but at the chance to answer questions no one else seemed to be asking. "Everyone out there calls them dangerous?" she asked. "Everyone out there created them to be," Farid said. "The Pact of Civilized Species forbids extermination of asset lineages now, too barbaric on record. So they found an elegant solution. Dump them where no one will see, and let time do the work. Out of sight, out of ethics." Except the world wasn't empty, Nyasha said. Except it wasn't. Farid folded his hands. I'm heading groundside at 6 a.m. with a security detail to make official contact with one of these enclaves. Command wants a xenopsychologist along. That's why you called me, Nyasha said. That, and because you once wrote that the definition of a person is a mind that can be reached by another mind, Farid answered. We need to know if these people can be reached. Nyasha looked at the frozen image on the glass again, at the Morvaal warrior cradling a smaller, bloodied one in his arms, head bowed in something like grief. I think, she said slowly, they already have been. By someone. By each other. We're late to the conversation. Farid almost smiled. Then let's not waste more time. They met Krann in the ruins of a Pact weapons drop. The place had once been a clean geometric blot of alloys and ceramic on satellite surveys, a small anomaly masked as an old meteorite crater. Now it was a jagged scar ripped through with vines and roots, its walls collapsed into a hollow amphitheater. Wreckage jutted like broken teeth. The air hummed with insects. Farid's landing team approached in open view. The ground was damp and gave under their boots. Nyasha could feel eyes in the foliage, the prickling awareness of being measured by something that did not think like a human. Jurek Ryback walked beside her, rifle at low ready. He had been selected precisely because he had survived too many ugly ground wars without losing his ability to look civilians in the eye afterward. It's not too late to recommend we back out, he murmured. Yes, it is, Nyasha replied. They already know we're here. Krann stepped out from behind the skeleton of a crashed transport, as if answering her. He moved with the casual certainty of someone who had killed enough times that one more day didn't matter. But his gaze was sharp, curious. He wore no helmet, only ragged armor plates grown like bone from his shoulders and ribs. Faint light traced the tattoos on his face. Down his thick neck, the lines coiled around old scars. Around him, a dozen Morvaal fanned out, spears of scavenged alloy in their hands, crude projectile launchers slung over their backs. Nyasha could taste ozone and something fetid on the air, remnants of an old chemical spill from when the drop site had been active. Krann looked at Farid's weapon, Jurek's stance, Nyasha's empty hands. He sniffed once, as if scent alone could tell him their intentions. You are from the other nests, he said. His voice was like rocks grinding. The translator at Nyasha's hip struggled, flickering through possible matches. His words were built from shards of Kharuun command phrases, Vessari, technical slang, and something older, the rough music of his own people. Farid nodded. We're from the cities, he said. We're from this world. Krann tilted his head. He had known humans, of course. His warband had raided their edges, stolen metal and food, sometimes bodies when hunger or commanders demanded. He had expected this day as a vague future, the day the other primates came with tanks and bombs, shouting about monsters and God's vengeance. They had not come in tanks. Their weapons hummed, but they were few, and they had brought healers. Nyasha stepped forward just enough to be visible as separate from the soldiers. My name is Nyasha, she said. I mend minds and bodies. We came to speak, not kill. Krann's nostrils flared at the word mend. It brushed against an old embedded concept, from labs and clinics where he had lain strapped under white lights while needles wrote orders into his nerves. He bared his teeth. We do not go back to their labs, he said. We will die here, fighting, before that. Nyasha's throat tightened at the word there. The way he said it placed humans in Kharuun and Vessari all together in a single category, the ones who made and unmade. We don't have those labs, she said gently. We were never part of that. We didn't know you existed until recently. You've lived alongside us without us hearing your story. I want to hear it now. Krann studied her face. The translator rendered her words into sounds he found clumsy, but he caught the rhythm beneath them. Work, choice, listening. He gestured around at the wreckage. They said there was only this left, he said. Weapons. Crates. We were the remainder. He turned the unfamiliar Terran word slowly. Scrap. They said we would rage and burn quickly, that the world would take us, but the world did not. We learned to hunt the creatures in your forests. We learned to hide from your machines." Nyasha listened, catching the bitter edge in his voice. Behind him, other Morvaal shifted, muscles taut. She could read the way they clustered, unconsciously forming a half-ring behind their leader. Trust, but not blind trust. "Who is they?" Farid asked. Krann spat, a glob of viscous saliva pattering onto ruined alloy. "Kharuun, Vessari, the pale fly people, the ones who shine when they move. They stand in high rooms and talk about civil worlds. They call us useful when we storm their enemies' cities. Then they call us danger when the wars end. They sent us here with broken guns and the promise that we would die without their air. They were wrong." He straightened to his full height. His eyes, which had looked hollow in drone feeds, now burned. "You stand in their cast-off place," he said to Farid, "and you are not theirs." Why? Farid could have spoken of orbital mechanics, of signal lag and FTL lanes and all the other accidents that had let Earth grow unnoticed in the shadows of greater empires. Instead, he answered the way he thought Krann would understand. They were afraid, he said. Afraid of what they had made. Afraid of being seen killing what they had made. They threw you away in the dark. They did not notice we were already here because they did not look. We are a mistake in their plan. The corner of Krann's mouth twitched. "You talk like a commander," he said, "not a breeder." Nyasha saw Farid's fingers loosen slightly at his sides. A small, important distinction. Breeder versus commander. Toolmaker versus someone who led from within the ranks. "We lead people," Nyasha said quietly. "Not tools." Krann's gaze flicked to her again. The word people still felt strange in his ears when applied to those with chitin less dense than his, bones not laced with ceramic. But he had seen humans fight, bleeding in fear but still placing themselves between his raiders and their small ones. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. Farid did not dance around it. "We want to offer you something that has never been offered," he said. "Regular food, shelter that does not vanish every season, work that is not slaughter for someone else's profit, training in how we fight, under our banners, with rules you can see, and a place in our law." Krann laughed once, harsh bark echoing in the ruin. Some of his warriors shifted, unsure. "You wish to make us tame," he said. "You wish to put collars on us and tell the other empires, 'Look, we have your old war beasts on our leashes.'" "No," Nyasha said, voice hardening. "We want to make sure no one else ever has a collar on you again." Krann's eyes narrowed. "Words," he said. Nyasha stepped closer, slowly enough that Jurek didn't flinch. "Look at me," she said. "Do I look like someone who could drag you anywhere you don't want to go?" Krann did. He saw a human woman, slight compared to him. Her clothes plain, no visible weapons. Her heartbeat was fast but even. Her pupils did not contract in fear. There was curiosity there, and anger, but not directed at him. "We cannot promise you there will be no more war," Farid said. "We cannot promise you we will never ask you to fight. But we promise you this: if you fight for us, you will know why. Your dead will have names on our walls. Your children will have schools instead of caches, and you will have the same laws that bind us." Krann felt a strange sensation in his chest at the word laws. Not fear, not rage, something like being weighed and found to have weight in return. "When the Kharuun made us," he said slowly, "they put a word in our heads, asset. They said we were numbers on a ledger, costs to be balanced. When they exiled us, they used a different word, hazard, trash that might burn their fingers if they held it too long. You offer a third word." He tasted it, the syllables unfamiliar and bright. "Soldier," he said. Nyasha nodded. "If you choose it." Krann's warband behind him rustled, a soft ripple like wind in armor. He turned to scan their faces. Some looked eager, some wary. All were watching him. He remembered screaming in chains, while Vessari technicians wrote calm notes in their slitted scripts. He remembered Kharuun officers issuing orders through chemical sprays that bent his thoughts until he could no longer tell where instinct ended and command began. He also remembered a human farmer kneeling by a broken fence post, hefting a rifle and shaking hands to face down a raiding party of Lithraks. That human had known they would die. They had stood anyway. Humans were small and weak compared to him. They still chose to stand. "We do not kneel," Krann said. "Not to them, not to you. If we come standing." Farid inclined his head. "Standing is all we ask," he said. And so the first Morvaal stepped onto Bulwark Ring as more than a rumor. The station's corridors had never held such a mix of footsteps. Morvaal tread heavy and deliberate, their weight-making deck-plating thrum. Lithraks moved with a faint scrape of scales and claws, always a half-step away from the walls, instinctively seeking ambush angles. Human boots made the crisp, familiar rhythm that had echoed in countless barracks. Terran Expeditionary Command had given Fort Adrasteia the worst climate they could build on. A high plateau of rock and thin air, winds that screamed and scoured, temperatures that swung brutally between day and night. It was equal opportunity misery. Gunnery Sergeant Kavya Narang considered that a good start. On the second day of training, she stood on the ridgeline, eyes narrowed against the sleet that cut sideways at her face. Her voice carried easily over the howling wind, amplified by a throat mic that fed into the mixed crowd's link bands. "Run!" The obstacle course below resembled a ruin in the middle of a sandstorm. Moving platforms ground against each other, steel teeth rising and falling. Pits yawned, filled with foam or icy water. Target drones popped up and down, projecting both human silhouettes and stylized Shulkarr over their frames to complicate target selection. Humans, Morvaal, and Lithraks scrambled through it together. A human recruit slipped on a frozen rung, hanging by one hand above a drop. A Morvaal darted past, huge arm bracing the ladder to keep it from swaying. "Move, small bones," the Morvaal growled. But there was no real insult in it. Down in a mud trench, Sisek cursed softly as the wind kicked grit into his exposed eye pits. He blinked the membrane clear and leaned his long frame out just far enough to take a shot. His rifle barked. A Shulkarr projection burst apart in pixels. "Good shot, Sisek," came Ensign Raphael Imai's voice through the link band. "But you left your tail too close to that tripwire." Sisek flicked his tail up an instant before the pressure strip could register. A foam charge deployed harmlessly a meter away, coating an unfortunate human recruit instead. Laughter barked from Morvaal throats on the embankment. The human recruit spat foam and, to their credit, managed a rueful bow. The brittle tension in the air cracked a little more. Kavya's attention never left the heart rate scrolling across her wrist display. The link bands fed her a constant stream of data: cortisol levels, focus indicators, aggression curves. One line on the graph began to spike. "Krann!" she snapped over the channel. "Check your breathing!" Down below, Krann had been hauling a weighted sled through a patch of sucking mud. The exertion, the cold, the scent of manufactured fear from the training drones, all gnawed at old patterns in his brain. For a moment he saw not Fort Adrasteia, but a Kharuun trench, bodies piled in front of him, the promise of release in slaughter. He set his jaw and obeyed the quiet instructions that Nyasha had drilled into him in a calm room weeks ago. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count the breaths. Name the things you can feel. The sting of the wind, the burn in your thighs, the weight of the harness. Name what is not here. The chemical reek of compulsion, the hum of Killsat guidance overhead programmed to erase him if he disobeyed. His heart rate curve dipped. "Better," Kavya said into his ear. Her tone gave nothing away, but a small green light blinked beside his name on her display. Jurek Ryback watched all this with a critical eye. He had seen too many commanders mistake toughness for cruelty. Kavya was tough, but every barked order concealed a calculation. What broke a recruit in a way they could rebuild, and what shattered them beyond use? At the far end of the course, during an exercise simulating a Shulkarr boarding action, the calculations nearly failed. One Morvaal recruit, younger and more impulsive than Krann, crashed through a foam barrier with too much enthusiasm. His ward-weave harness took the impact wrong and glitched. For an instant, its haptic matrix fired every pain stimulator at once. He screamed, the sound raw and distorted by the link band. His aggression curve on Kavya's display shot straight up, burning red. His pupils blew wide. All the calm breathing exercises, all the talk of choice, vanished under a flood of instinct the Kharuun had written into his bones. He spun, eyes blazing, and the nearest moving shape in his view was not a Shulkarr drone. It was a human recruit, half his size, face pale under the sleet. The Morvaal charged. Up in the control booth, an alarm blared. A red icon appeared beside the recruit's ID. A new button lit up. Emergency termination. The neural threads woven into the Morvaal's harness could still be triggered to seize his heart if necessary. "Gunnery, Sergeant." A text snapped, hand moving toward the switch. Kavya froze for a half-second. Mind split. If she didn't authorize the kill now, the recruit could die. If she did, every exile in Fort Adrasteia would know that, in the end, they were still seen as rabid animals with a remote-controlled off switch. Before she could speak, Jurek was already moving. He vaulted the railing, dropping into the mud below with an impact that rattled his teeth. The wind tore at his hair. His boots slid. But he threw himself between the charging Morvaal and the frozen human recruit anyway. "Krann!" he bellowed as he ran. "On me!" His link band flared. Krann, already halfway through another obstacle, skidded to a halt. He could hear the younger Morvaals scream through the shared channel, could smell the metallic tang of uncontrolled rage. "Do not." Kavya's voice snapped into his ear. "You are still recovering from." Krann ignored her. He pivoted, dug his feet in, and hurled himself down the slope toward the crisis. The enraged Morvaal's arm came up, claws extended, ready to tear Ryback open. Jurek did not raise his rifle. Instead, he raised his empty hands, palms out. "Hey!" he shouted directly into the Morvaal's face. "Look at me!" The Morvaal's vision tunneled on the human. One mutter into better, and 1-2 mutter into better, 1-2 mutter into better, and mutter into better, and to better. He smelled blood, fear, the promise of chemical ecstasy that had always followed a kill in the labs. His nervous system expected the reward. Jurek met his crazed eyes and, with practiced precision, opened his own link band to full broadcast. He let the Morvaal feel his fear, not the paralyzing terror of prey, the sharp, bright edge of fear that a soldier felt when he stepped in front of fire for someone else. Alongside it, Jurek pushed the steady iron of his will, the shape of his resolve. "I will stop you. I will not kill you if you stop yourself." His heart hammered against his ribs. The link band translated the rhythm into pulses under the Morvaal's skin. For an instant, the enraged recruit stuttered. Confusion spiked across the shared channel. This was not what his rewired instincts understood. There was no chemical leash, no shouted command in Kharuun battle cant. There was only this human radiating a strange cocktail of fear and stubborn defiance, daring him to make a choice. Then Krann hit him from the side like a chunk of falling asteroid. They slammed into the mud together. Krann wrapped his arms around the younger one's torso, pinning his limbs with the casual brutality of someone who knew exactly how much pressure would bruise without breaking. "Listen," Krann snarled into his ear. "Feel. That is a comrade, not a target." He forced his own link band channel open, flooding the recruit with his own emotions. Shame at nearly repeating old patterns, fury at the architects who had written those patterns, and, burning under it, something that might, someday, be pride. The younger Morvaal convulsed, a hoarse, strangled sound tearing from his throat. Then his muscles went slack. He sagged in Krann's grip, panting. On the ridge, the emergency termination button remained unpressed. Kavya's hand finally dropped to her side. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Stand down," she ordered, voice hoarse but steady. "All units, debrief in 30 minutes. Jurek helped the shaken human recruit to his feet. The recruit stared up at the Morvaal still pinned in the mud, then at Krann. Mud streaked Jurek's uniform and trickled cold down his spine. He was shaking now that the moment had passed. "Thank you," the recruit managed, "to all of them at once." Krann snorted and pushed himself up, hauling the younger Morvaal with him. "Train better," he said. "Next time you should be out of his reach before he can swing." The roughness did not hide the deeper message. He had chosen not to kill. It was a small act, but for a species engineered for obedience, it was monumental. Word of the near incident spread quickly beyond Fort Adrasteia. It reached Bulwark Ring, then the Stalwart Dawn, then slipped along unofficial channels into broader space. The story lost details and picked up embellishments as it went. By the time it reached the Alethi Assembly, it had become a tale of a human sergeant who had placed his unarmored body between a berserker and an unarmed recruit, trusting that compassion and training would outweigh conditioning. Envoy Tessel Ilithi listened to the report in a chamber of shimmering veils aboard the ESS Radiant Venture. The Ilithi were tall and delicate in appearance, with translucent exoskeletons that refracted light into faint rainbows as they moved. Tessel's wing sheaths flexed once in thought. A species that throws away its constructed warriors considers this madness, Tessel said, voice layered in 3 harmonic tones. A species that has never had such tools might see it as obvious. The junior diplomat across from Tessel shifted, carapace clicking against the woven biofiber of his seat. The Pact of Civilized Species exists to limit escalations, he reminded gently. If Earth teaches Morvaal and Lithraks to fight as disciplined units, are they not rekindling the very fire we sought to bury? Tessel flicked a tendril, a dismissive gesture. If you bury a fire loosely, it smolders, Tessel said. If you bury thinking beings alive, some dig their way out. Our pact did not solve the problem. It merely transferred it to another sphere and closed our eyes. They thought of the feeds from Earth, Morvaal standing at attention under human flags, Lithraks learning to use rifles built to ergonomic specs that made their fingers ache just looking at them. Perhaps we created an opportunity, Tessel mused. A species with no role in our old wars, no guilt in our old deeds, has now met our discarded sins and decided to claim them. The junior diplomat hesitated. Will you recommend sanction? He asked. Tessel considered. In another chamber on another world, High Minister Jalar Vessari was also reviewing reports. Where Tessel saw an opportunity, Jalar saw a threat. The Vessari had not become one of the most quietly dominant blocks in the Pact by letting variables run loose. Jalar had built an entire career on turning unpredictability into leverage. Watching shaky footage of Krann speaking, halting Terran on a training field, Jalar saw too much potential. These humans believe themselves moral innovators, Jalar murmured, tracing a lazy pattern on their data slate. Its surface rippled like oil. They believe they are the first to offer choice to tools. That arrogance makes them useful. On the display, another sector map shifted. An ominous red stain spread from the edges inward, the latest projections of Shulkarr swarm expansion. Entire systems had winked out along its path. The Shulkarr devour everything, Jalar said softly, including treaties, including complacency. The Vessari minister toggled an overlay. One small blue mark blinked near the red stain. Caldris 9, a minor colony under Terran influence, sat squarely in the Shulkarr's projected path. How fortunate, Jalar said. Our new moral experiment will face a trial soon. If Earth fails, the problem solves itself. If they succeed, we have a different tool to manage. While Jalar made calculations in distant halls, on Bulwark Ring the first Legionnaire deployment order appeared in Admiral Lemaire's queue. It was 7 a.m. station time when he reviewed the consolidated brief from Caldris 9. Shulkarr scouts had been sighted in the outer system. Local militias were brave but outmatched. Terran conventional marines could be deployed, but analysts estimated high casualties and a significant chance of total colony loss. Only one asset profile in the system database matched the Shulkarr's rapid adaptation and brutal close-quarters fighting style. Farid entered at Lemaire's gesture, uniform still dusted with the red grit of Fort Adrasteia. You've seen the projections, Lemaire said without preamble. I have. Farid's jaw clenched. We both know we need the Legionnaires. And we both know the Pact will scream the moment we field them, in what they call a civilized theater, Lemaire said. I have already received 3 polite assassinations of character in diplomatic form. Outside the viewport, a Morvaal transport craft drifted in docking alignment, bulky and rough next to the sleek Terran shuttles. Its sides bore a hastily painted emblem, a stylized human hand and a Morvaal fist crossed behind a shared shield. They sent their mistakes to burn in our sky, Lemaire said quietly. Now they demand we keep those mistakes buried while their other mistakes eat our colonies. I find my sympathy limited. Farid grimaced in something like agreement. If we don't send the exiles, Caldris 9 dies, he said. If we do, we may be labeled a rogue actor. We lose trade, defense compacts, maybe more. Or we gain something they never imagined, Lemaire countered. A new kind of alliance. He flicked the order toward Farid. Mobilize Cohort 1 and 2, he said. Stalwart Dawn jumps at 6 p.m. Notify Fort Adrasteia, and tell your xenopsychologist we'll likely need her on the comms net. Caldris 9 hung like a wounded eye in the black. When the Stalwart Dawn dropped out of FTL, the space around the colony was already scarred. Shulkarr hive-ships had pierced the orbital defense grid. One station was a spinning ruin. 2 others burned quietly, their lights dim. On the planet's surface, firefly flecks of energy showed where Shulkarr ground forces had breached the colony's outer walls. On the Legionnaire deployment deck, Morvaal and Lithraks stood in orderly rows, the ward-weave harnesses around their torsos alive with soft light. Engineers ran final checks on link bands, verifying that each one could handle the data throughput that would surge through them soon. Lila Kharuun flexed her gloved fingers, rifle mag seated, as she paced in front of her squad. The Morvaal beside her watched with something close to impatience. Your hands shake, Krann observed. Everyone's hands shake before a drop, Lila said without breaking stride. If they don't, they're either lying or dead inside. Krann's own massive hands were steady. The link band on his wrist, however, pulsed faster than usual. I have fought on worlds they don't speak of, he said, but never like this, not with choice. Lila glanced up at him. The drop bay thumped as the first wave's pods cycled into launch position. Through the small viewport, she caught a glimpse of Caldris 9's thin clouds, stained gray by smoke. You have someone on the ground now, she said. Someone you choose to stand for. We've got evac coordinates for a school dome on the east side. That's our first objective. Krann snorted softly. You think I fight harder for small ones? He asked, a defensive edge in his tone. I think you already do, Lila answered. You just never got to admit it without being punished. Krann's gaze snapped to her, anger flashing. Then he remembered a scrawny Morvaal child clinging to his arm on Earth, watching the first human instructors with enormous eyes. He remembered turning away so his warband wouldn't see the softness in his face. He grunted. We're done talking, he said. It is time to jump. Above, the overhead speakers crackled. Farid's voice filled the bay, steady as the burn of a maneuvering thruster. This is Colonel Kavala, he said. This is what we have trained for. Legionnaires, today the galaxy will see you, not as hazards, not as numbers on a ledger, but as soldiers. Stick to your teams. Trust your link bands. And remember, the Shulkarr do not care who they eat. You are the only line between them and everyone on that world. The pods locked into place with heavy clunks. Red lights turned amber, then green. Drop, Farid ordered. The Stalwart Dawn spat fire. Dozens of armored capsules streaked toward Caldris 9's battered atmosphere, their heat shields flaring. Inside, Morvaal dug claws into harness grips. Lithraks coiled their tails under them. Humans gritted teeth against the crushing G-load. Krann felt the familiar weight press him into his seat, but unlike the drops he had made under Kharuun command, there was no chemical fog seeping into his veins, no shrill compulsion codes flooding his spinal cord. Instead, he heard Lila's breathing over the link band, steady and controlled. 5 seconds to burn through. Raphael Imai called to his team. His voice wobbled once, then firmed. Check seals. Weapons live at my mark. Sisek checked his rifle, tail lashing rhythmically. He had never dropped into a Shulkarr infestation as part of a coordinated strike before. Usually he had been thrown in as a distraction, something bright and expendable. This time, the mission plan had his name attached to specific objectives on a tactical map. The pods slammed into the atmosphere. Flame licked the viewport. Vibrations shook bolts near their breaking point. Then, Suddenly, the roar outside shifted pitch, and the buffeting ceased. The pods punched through the cloud layer into choking columns of smoke. Lila got her first glimpse of the colony. Outer walls breached in 3 places, Shulkarr bodies seething through like ants. Firestorms danced along fuel lines. In one quadrant, huddled civilians clustered in underground shelters, their flimsy blast doors glowing under cutting beams. Pods 1 through 10, East Quadrant, Farid's voice snapped. Link band sync to local grid. Krann, Kharuun, your LZ is hot. Remember the evac point. The pod slammed down hard enough that Lila's teeth clicked together. Explosive bolts fired. The door blew outward, slamming into a Shulkarr drone that had been creeping toward the impact site. Krann was out first, roaring, wardweave humming as it buffered and channeled his stored kinetic energy. He hit the ground running, boots skidding for half a meter before he found purchase. His first punch pulverized a Shulkarr carapace, the shockwave rippling into 2 others behind it. "Form on Krann!" Lila shouted, sprinting after him. "Legionnaires! Mark your sectors!" They fought toward the school dome. Each step burned. Shulkarr scuttlers lunged from shattered windows. Larger grinder forms crashed down from rooftops. The air stank of acid and cooking protein. Lila's world narrowed to the sweep of her rifle and the soft haptic taps on her link band from Sisek, warning her of flankers she couldn't see. Again and again, Lila saw something that had never existed before. Caldris 9, Morvaal holding tight defensive formations, covering human reloads, pulling injured Lithraks back behind cover. Lithraks calling targets not just for themselves but for adjacent Morvaal squads, precision guiding brute force. At the entrance to the school dome, they hit a wall of resistance. A Shulkarr node, gorged on colony biomass, had wrapped its tendrils around the blast door mechanisms, eating through steel with disgusting enthusiasm. Krann snarled, but he did not charge blindly. His link band thrummed. Jurek's quick tactical ping appeared. 2 Shulkarr heavy units on either side of the choke point, ready to pounce on any direct assault. "Left flank, suppress," Krann growled. "Right, with me. Kharuun, your small bones fit the access duct. Take Sisek." Lila didn't argue. She and Sisek peeled off, slipping into a side corridor half-choked with debris. In the command center of the stalwart Dawn, Admiral Lemaire watched his tactical map shift from red to a bleeding mix of orange and amber. "They're holding the east," an officer reported. "Civilians still alive in the school dome. Legionnaires are buying them time." On another display, the ESS Radiant Venture glided into a high orbit. Ilithi communications arrays, already reconfiguring themselves. "Envoy Tessel, you're late to the party," Lemaire said dryly over the secure channel. Tessel's multi-tonal voice came back smooth. "Ilithi parties always arrive at the correct time," Tessel said. "We are here to observe, and perhaps to assist, if your experiment proves more volatile than you projected," Lemaire snorted. "You'll forgive us if we prefer to manage our own volatility," he said. "But your sensor grid might be useful." "Of course," Tessel replied. "We will share what we see." The Shulkarr, unfortunately, were not the only ones watching. High Minister Jalar's orders had already gone out hours before, encoded in a simple, innocuous burst of traffic routed through layers of proxies. On a distant relay buoy, a dormant Vessari device woke, unfolded, and began to whisper. The signal it sent was nothing that any conventional .com array would recognize. It did not ride on radio or tight beam laser. It pulsed in a narrow band of exotic particles that slid through matter and danced along the edge of quantum fields. It had been designed long ago in quiet labs for exactly this purpose. Deep within every Morvaal and Lithraks body, at the intersection of nerves and engineered crystal filaments, a matching structure shivered as the first pulse touched it. On Caldris 9, in the middle of a fight, Krann stumbled. For a moment his vision blurred. The wardweave read a massive cascade of neural activity and, assuming it was combat stress, tried to compensate. Instead, it amplified. "Kharuun battle cant, silent for years," screamed in the back of his mind. Old orders replayed themselves. Charge, kill, silence all who disobey. He heard a voice that was not Farid's, Not Lila's. Not his own, slicing through every thought. Asset. Function. Obey. Across the battle line, Morvaal and Lithraks cried out, some dropping to their knees. Others stiffened, weapons rising in shaky grips. Linkband feeds filled with static as their nervous systems overload. One Morvaal turned, eyes glassy, and aimed his weapon at a cluster of human marines. His finger tightened on the trigger. On the stalwart Dawn, alarms flared. The terminal in front of Admiral Lemaire vomited warning indicators. The system had recognized an anomalous pattern, a coordinated external activation of the embedded compulsion tags that the wardweave had only partially insulated. Someone's hit them with a recall signal. A tech choked. We're seeing massive spikes in subcortical activity. They're reverting to original programming. Another panel lit up. The emergency termination function, intended as a last resort if a Legionnaire unit went rogue, now begged for input. Admiral, the officer at that station said. Sweat beaded on his forehead. If we don't cut them now, they'll tear our own lines apart. Lemaire's gaze flicked to the feed from Caldris 9. He saw a Morvaal raising his gun toward a human. He saw Sisek writhe, clutching his head. He saw Krann slam his fist into a wall hard enough to crack both. He thought of all the months at Fort Adrasteia, all the evenings Nyasha had spent breathing with these beings until they found a new rhythm. He thought of Earth, used without consent as a burial ground for other people's sins. If he triggered the termination, he might save the humans on the ground. He would also prove to Jaller and every other minister watching that Earth ultimately saw these exiles as just another controllable asset. Sir, the officer pressed. We have seconds. Lemaire made his choice. No terminations, he said, voice sharp as a snapped cable. Lock it out. Get me Nyasha and Envoy Tessel now. On Bulwark Ring, Nyasha sprinted for a comm booth as the emergency code flashed on her datapad. Her heart pounded. She had warned them, in dense papers and quiet briefings, that the old empires would have left back doors in any biological system they had made. She had not expected them to be so ruthless as to trigger them in the middle of an existential battle where Shulkarr devoured indiscriminately. The comlink snapped open. Tessel's image appeared beside Lemaire's on the display, Elithy facets shimmering with rapid calculations. You feel it? Nyasha asked, without greeting. We feel the pattern, Tessel said. Vessari craftsmanship, elegant, in a cruel way. Can you block it? Lemaire demanded. Not fully, Tessel answered. The signal is already in their bodies, but we may be able to break the ownership signature. Sever the connection between command and compulsion. Nyasha nodded, breath shallow. Use the link bands, she said. We engineered them to ride on similar pathways. If we can superimpose a new pattern, we might overwrite the trigger. Lemaire's eyes narrowed. You're proposing to hijack the same mechanism the Vessari are using, he said. Yes, Nyasha said, but not to control, to free. Tessel's wings flicked once, a sign of excitement. We can shape a noise field that disrupts the specific reward channel the Vessari tied to obedience, they said. It will hurt, briefly, but when the signal subsides, there will be no leash left to tug. Do it, Lemaire said. I'll route you full access to the link band network. Nyasha, you're riding shotgun. Nyasha slid into the interface, fingers flying. She had helped design the link band as a bridge of empathy, a way for humans to share context with beings whose senses and instincts diverged wildly. Now she turned that empathy inward, mapping the Morvaal and Lithraks neural architectures in real time. On Caldris 9, Krann dropped to one knee. Voices battered at his mind. Old and new. Asset. Obey. Kill. Krann. Breathe. This is Nyasha. Her presence flooded his link band, not as words, but as a familiar pattern of calm. The particular cadence she used when coaxing him through memories of the labs. He snarled, teeth grinding. They call again, he gasped out loud, even though no one near him could understand the Kharuun-laced words. They call us back into the chains. They cannot reach you without your consent, Nyasha projected, knowing it was not strictly true, but needing the statement to be true in his bones. I am going to send you something. It will feel like fire. Hold on to the thought that you are Krann of the Morvaal, not asset unit. he roared as the first wave hit. Tessel's countersignal poured through the link bands, piggybacking on the Vessari's own invasive pattern. Where the original signal whispered commands, the new one screamed interference, shredding the specific association between the compulsion trigger and its soothing reward. Every Morvaal and Lithraks on the field convulsed as decades of conditioning were ripped up by the roots. Neurons that had always fired in certain patterns sputtered, misfired, then abruptly rewired. The pain was indescribable. For a few terrifying moments, the exiles' minds were static and chaos. Some collapsed. Others lashed out blindly, claws scoring stone and steel. Then, like a storm passing, the roar in their skulls faded. In the sudden, eerie quiet, Krann realized something astonishing. The voice that had called him asset was gone. He probed cautiously at the place where it had always lurked, a pressure he had learned to ignore the way one ignored the weight of one's own armor. There was only emptiness now, and under it, something frightening and exhilarating. Silence that was truly his, waiting to be filled. He could still hear Farid's voice, Nyasha's, Lila's, through the link band. But their tones did not slide hooks into his spine. He could ignore them if he chose. The choice itself hit him like another physical blow. Across the battlefield, Morvaal staggered to their feet, blinking in dazed wonder. Lithraks flexed their claws experimentally, as if half expecting invisible chains to snap taut. None did. The Shulkarr did not care about liberation. They surged forward, sensing weakness. On Lila's HUD, Exile IFF tags winked out, then reappeared. Their statuses changed from alert, compromised, to unknown, and then to active, unleashed. Krann, she called, cautiously. Talk to me. Krann rose. His wardweave harness had dimmed during the neural storm, its control systems locked out by safety subroutines. Now they flickered back, awaiting input. He could feel the Shulkarr closing in, hear the scuttle of their limbs. He could see human colonists huddled behind half-melted blast doors, small faces pressed to cracks. He could do anything he wanted. His species had been built to want only one thing in battle: blood. The architects had assumed that, if ever freed from one master, Morvaal would simply seek another war to drown in. Krann realized he wanted something stranger. He wanted the children behind those doors to live long enough to see a different kind of Morvaal than the ones in their nightmares. With a slow, deliberate motion that made his muscles protest, he reached down and picked up his fallen rifle. His link band hummed. "I am Krann of the Morvaal," he said, voice low but carrying. "I am not their asset. I am not their hazard. I am a soldier. I choose." He turned toward the Shulkarr. "All Legionnaires," he roared, switching to Terran without thinking. The unfamiliar syllables fit his mouth better than Kharuun now. "On your feet! We are not done!" Something profound adjusted across the battlefield, Morvaal bellowed, not in the feral cadence of old activation codes, but in rough versions of human drill calls. Lithraks snapped into firing positions. Where a moment before they had been puppets caught mid-cut, now they were actors who had just taken control of the script. Lila felt tears sting her eyes even as she reloaded. The moment was messy, bloody, and there were still too many Shulkarr. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she would tell stories about this instant for the rest of her life. "Kharuun, left lane." Jurek's voice cut through the swell of feeling. "They're trying to flank you." "On it," Lila replied, voice thick. She swung her rifle, dropped 3 Shulkarr in quick succession, then threw herself behind the bulk of a Morvaal who had just taken an acid jet to the chest. The wardweave hissed, healing layers knitting over the burn as the Morvaal grunted. "Thank you," he rumbled. "Just returning the favor," Lila shot back. Up in orbit, the Alethi communication suite shuddered. "We have full decoupling," Tessel reported, mandibles flexing in a rare show of excitement. "The leash is gone. Vessari cannot reassert control without physically touching every exile in the field." Nyasha sagged against the console, only now realizing how tightly she had been holding herself. "They're free," she whispered. "For now," Tessel agreed. "Freedom is not a state, Dr. Okafori. It is a continuous act. But yes, you have given them room to act. On the Vessari side, Jalar watched in cold fury as biosigns stabilized where collapse had been expected. How interesting, Jalar murmured, concealed irritation seething under the calm tone. The humans refused to use the termination option we kindly left them. They cut our line instead. Noble and inconvenient. The Shulkarr didn't care about political inconveniences. They cared about biomass and resistance. With their mental link unimpaired, the hive reorganized rapidly. New forms flowed from breach holes, thicker armor, redundant nerve clusters. A towering monstrosity hauled itself free of a pit, its thorax riddled with sensory nodes. Lila took one look and swore. That thing sees everything, Sissik hissed through the link band. His tongue flicked involuntarily, tasting the air even through filters. Shoot it and it will adapt in 2 shots. Then we don't let it learn, Raphael said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice. Sissik, can you hit that bundle of nodules under the 3rd plate from the left? The one about 1 human hand wide? Sissik squinted through his scope. At this range? In this wind? He said. He shot anyway. The bullet punched through the exact spot Raphael had named. The monstrous Shulkarr spasmed, one of its feeder limbs going limp. For a crucial moment, its coordination faltered. Morvaal took that opening, charging in with coordinated strikes that shattered joints and tore out clusters of glittering neural tissue. Acid splashed, wardweave smoked. Several exiles went down, screaming or silent. But the behemoth died. The Shulkarr line flickered. On the tactical overlay, enemy density thinned around the school dome. Evac corridors opened. Push, Farid snarled. Get those civilians out. Dawn, divert a shuttle to LZ Baker. We're not losing those kids after all this. The battle for Caldris 9 lasted hours. By 3 p.m. local time, the primary Shulkarr hive ships were either crippled or in retreat, their swarms shredded by a combined onslaught of human orbital artillery and ground-based counterattacks. On the ground, amidst heaps of dissolved chitin and craters still smoking, humans and exiles slumped together, too exhausted to stand. Inside the battered school dome, a child peeked from behind a teacher's legs at the massive figure in the doorway. Krann ducked to avoid scraping his horns on the ceiling. His armor was scorched, one arm hanging limp where internal support struts had snapped. Blood-bright Morvaal blue and darker red from who knew whose veins spattered him. The child clutched a stuffed animal. It looked vaguely like a cow. Krann's gaze met the child's. His species had been a whispered terror in frontier stories not long ago. Beasts in the night, used as a metaphor to frighten children into being good. Now one stood in the doorway, breathing hard. The child raised the toy tentatively. Are you a soldier? The small voice asked. Krann's throat worked. He could say, We are war beasts. We are hazards. We are nightmares. Instead, he knelt, wincing as his joints protested, to bring his massive bulk more on the child's level. Yes, he said simply, I am. The child studied him for a moment, then held out the toy with solemn ceremony. You can hold it if you want, they said. You saved us. Krann's hand, big enough to crush steel pipes, curled carefully around the tiny plush. He had never been entrusted with something so helpless and unimportant. No one had ever thought to. His link band hummed softly. Somewhere behind him, Lila smiled, despite her fatigue. Above, the stalwart Dawn's forward screens flickered as a new shape entered orbit. The KS Sable Edict was a Predator's silhouette, all hard angles and recessed guns. Its Kharuun insignia gleamed like a threat. A tight beam transmission speared the stalwart Dawn. This is Captain Herrick of the Sable Edict, a clipped voice announced. By authority of the Pact of Civilized Species and under emergency contamination protocols, you are ordered to withdraw all irregular forces from Caldris 9. Quarantine bombardment will commence in 20 minutes. In the stalwart Dawn's command center, a dozen pairs of eyes swung toward Admiral Lemaire. Open a reply channel, Lemaire said quietly. Channel open. The comms officer confirmed. This is Admiral Hugo Lemaire of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, Lemaire said, his voice carrying the fatigue and iron of the last days. "Your quarantine is denied." There was a soft intake of breath from someone at a nearby console. Saying no to a Kharuun battleship was not common practice. "Admiral," Captain Herrick said with a careful disdain of someone who considered themselves superior but graciously patient with the backward. In the engagement below, unauthorized asset species were deployed in a civilian theater in direct violation of Pact Clause 12.4. Containment requires containment bombing that will vaporize thousands of human civilians and hundreds of newly freed sentients who just helped save this world. Lemaire cut in. "Do not pretend your protocol is about health. It is about hiding your trash." On the ESS Radiant Venture, Tessel monitored the exchange with all their attention. Their comms team had already begun splicing battlefield footage into a feed that looped between multiple perspectives. Morvaal shielding children, Lithraks dragging wounded Marines to safety, humans and exiles sharing trenches. Tessel sent that composite on a wide-beam broadcast, unencrypted. Citizens across the Pact territories would see it. The Kharuun captain knew it, too. The Sable Edict sensors would have flagged the outgoing data. "You are out of line, Admiral," Herrick said, an edge of ice creeping into the words. "This is not a court of public opinion. This is a matter of—" "It is exactly a matter of public opinion," Lemaire said. "If you fire on Caldris 9 now, with our feeds live, every world in the Pact will see you murdering children to keep an old secret tidy." Herrick's silence crackled over the comm. Kharuun were not driven by shame in the same way humans were, but they were deeply attuned to status. Being seen as incompetent or cruel without necessity could cripple a career. In the quiet that followed, another voice cut in on the diplomatic channel. Smooth, layered with deceptive warmth. "This is High Minister Jallar of the Vessari hegemony," it said. "Perhaps we can all take a breath." Lemaire's jaw tightened. Jallar's appearance meant the situation had escalated beyond a local captain's discretion. The hegemony notes that Terran Command has improvised in the use of legacy asset species. Jallar continued. "This is strictly a violation. However, the Shulkarr threat is inconvenient for everyone. And your feeds are very compelling." That last word dripped with calculation. The Vessari minister was already weighing the value of letting humans keep their new pets versus the cost of being seen slaughtering them. "Hegemony proposes a compromise," Jallar said, with the unctuousness of one offering a favor they would later collect on. "Earth will retain responsibility for all asset lineages in its quarantine corridor. You will not export them into Pact territories without consent. In return, there will be no bombardment, and today's creativity will be treated as a precedent rather than a crime." Lemaire knew a leash when he heard one. He also knew that if he refused, the Sable Edict's guns might light regardless of broadcasts. The Kharuun could weather a storm of bad press if they framed it as necessary pest control. The Vessari could bury just about anything in procedural fog. On his screens, he saw Krann in the school dome, still clutching the stuffed animal. He saw Lila leaning against a shattered wall, helmet off, eyes closed in brief, bone-deep relief. He saw Sisek perched on a half-collapsed pillar, scanning the sky as if expecting fire from above. "What guarantee do we have that you won't send another recall signal?" Lemaire asked. On some distant Vessari flagship, Jallar smiled thinly. The recall was an internal hegemony matter addressing an unsanctioned deployment of proprietary assets, they said. Now that these beings are no longer owned by us in any legal sense, there was a faint sneer on the last two words. "We have no more interest in managing them." Nyasha, listening on a side channel, realized the deeper implication. The Vessari hadn't just lost control. They had been forced to admit, however obliquely, that Morvaal and Lithraks were no longer property. "Very well," Lemaire said. "Earth accepts responsibility, but understand this, Minister. We are not your custodial world. We will not clean up your messes in secret while you posture as civilized." "Of course," Jallar purred. "You will do it loudly." The line cut. On the Kharuun bridge, Captain Herrick received the quiet directive to stand down under Vessari advisement. Herrick ground his teeth in private frustration, but obeyed. The Sable Edict's weapons dimmed. On Caldris 9, the only sign of this high-level maneuvering was the absence of new fire in the sky. Hours later, under a gray, smoke-striped sky, a makeshift memorial stood just outside the colony's central plaza. Someone had welded together scraps of armor into a pillar. Names were being etched into it manually, one by one, in 3 scripts. Terran Standard, a Vessari-derived glyph set that the Morvaal had cannibalized into their own written language, and a jagged scratch pattern the Lithraks used for quick battlefield marks. Lila Kharuun stood with a data slate, reading from the casualty list. Jurek stood beside her, voice ready for the alternating names. Krann and Sisek flanked them, armor patched, wounds bandaged. "Private Hannah Ortiz," Lila called. "Present," someone in the crowd murmured softly, the old ritual acknowledging the dead as still part of the group. "Legionnaire Rek, of the Morvaal," Jurek read next. Krann stepped forward and carved the name into the metal with one claw, the gesture almost reverent. "Present," he rumbled. "Legionnaire Saha Lithraks," Lila continued. Sisek's hand shook only slightly as he marked Saha's name. "Present," he whispered, his voice so soft the link bands had to amplify it to reach the gathered. Human families stood beside Morvaal warbands and Lithraks clutches, some touching, some keeping a respectful distance. Children watched with wide eyes. For many of them, this ceremony would be their first memory of exiles, not as monsters in the dark, but as fellow mourners. When the last name was spoken, silence fell. It was not perfect. There were coughs, the distant whine of damaged infrastructure, a baby crying. But it held. Nyasha spoke then, her voice projected from a small holo-emitter near the base of the pillar. She was still on Bulwark Ring, working, but Lila had insisted her words be part of this. "Today," Nyasha said, "we remember the dead. Human, Morvaal, Lithraks. The Pact tried to decide which of you counted. We refuse that division. You all count. You all have names." Krann's claws flexed at his sides. He felt the ghost of the old command word asset flicker and die completely in the presence of this new ritual. Later, aboard the stalwart Dawn as it cruised back toward the exile corridor, Farid Kavala stood with Admiral Lemaire in a quiet observation blister. Stars wheeled slowly outside. "You know they'll come for us one day," Farid said. "Kharuun, Vessari, some coalition afraid of what we're building. They won't always be stayed by public outrage." "I know," Lemaire said, "but by then, we won't be standing alone." He nodded toward the lower decks, where Morvaal voices rose in rough song, punctuated by occasional human laughter. Somewhere in those humming spaces, Sisek patiently corrected a human recruit's stance. Somewhere, Krann explained to a wide-eyed Morvaal child the concept of citizen as Nyasha had explained it to him. On a tactical screen in a side room, a small blip near a dead world labeled Naruk flashed, then returned to dormant status. Scout drones had picked up faint biosigns there. Old war breeds slept under ice and stone, waiting for someone to either kill them or wake them up. Lemaire watched that blip for a long moment, then turned away. "Send a recon team," he said. "Mixed unit. No weapons hot without my direct order. Their mission is to talk first." Farid's brows rose. "You think those things can be reached?" he asked. Lemaire remembered Krann clutching a stuffed toy in hands built for slaughter. He remembered Sisek marking Saha's name on the memorial. He remembered Nyasha's voice saying, "A person is a mind that can be reached by another mind." "I think we've already proven the old empires were wrong about what's possible," he said. "Let's keep providing them with uncomfortable evidence." The recon order went out. On Bulwark Ring, new recruits, human and exile, arrived at Fort Adrasteia's windswept plateau, shivering in the thin air, squinting against the sleet. Kavya Narang waited with her slate, ready to turn them into something the galaxy had never seen before. On Caldris 9, children told stories about the towering Morvaal, who had knelt to take a toy into his bloodied hands and had said simply, "I am a soldier." In quiet offices in the Kharuun Dominion and the Vessari hegemony, ministers and admirals whispered about containment and escalation, about a small, stubborn world that refused to throw anyone away. And out beyond the mapped lanes, near the cold rock of Naruk, something stirred faintly in its sleep as it heard, for the first time, a different kind of call.